Hello everyone, my name is Isaac. I'm going to be presenting about the tangible and intangible impacts of political and ecological art on environmental justice and social action. And I also want to thank now and at the end of the presentation Anne Giannotti for being my advisor. She's here in the crowd with us today and it wouldn't be possible without her. So to kind of start, my project was outlined by a guiding question in this kind of intrigue and understanding of how ecological art can engage with activism and how theoretical discourse and social change can really be impacted by art practice. And I broke this down into my project by two different divisions. Namely, the first part is focusing on learning and understanding the intersectional impact of art, ecology, activism, and social change, and kind of looking at how those can impact each other through written analysis. So a pretty long paper is in the process of being written right now, in addition to making, curating, and installing my own art installation, which was done back in January. So to kind of look at this, I want to start by first acknowledging the current literature that's in this field. So although it is a pretty niche field, there is some literature on ecological art focusing on what this is defined as with natural materials built by the environment and as well as the climate, focusing on the creation process, as well as the educational materials that could be used in this. So one example of this is Ricardo Ramos, a Portuguese artist based on creating materials from plastic that's washed up on the shores of near shorelines, and then using this to then create educational materials for local school systems. So kind of with this, a lot of the literature, including Ramos, is going to be focused largely a Eurocentric approach. So this is something that I was looking to kind of further and make sure that I could implement a more intersectional approach to my research, making sure that it was outside of just the Eurocentric current knowledge that is out there. Specifically, a lot of the research is also focused on French philosophy based off the three different ecologies. And I tried to kind of sway away from that in my research and analytical paper to make sure that it is more intersectional, specifically focusing on environmental justice as a subcategory for this art, because that was really lacking in the current literature. So to kind of define this, just the two key terms that I want to define out of these four is ecological art and environmental justice, as I'm going to be saying this a lot in the presentation, as well as it was kind of noted in the paper as well. So with this specifically, ecological art is art created with the physical materials that is either from the climate and ecology, as mentioned prior, but it's also there to inform about ecological crises and call to action intersectional change within any different landscapes within social, cultural, or political. So with this specifically, I wanted to look at this art that incorporates environmental justice, which I've worked in prior, and I wanted to look at kind of the principle that all people have this right to fair and equitable distribution of environmental protection and kind of have that benefit at an equitable level. I also sometimes will be referencing political art and activist art. Just quickly, political art is more focused on the informational side of things and the informing, whereas activist art is focused on the art and resistance side of things within politics. So to go into this, my project focused on three different main targets: spreading awareness, evoking emotion, and socio-environmental action. And through that, I was able to kind of perform a main case study done with Pacific Standard Time, which is a main exhibit in Los Angeles, largely based there, but it actually had 800 different artists and 70 different exhibits all throughout Southern California. So I was able to visit there. This exhibit happens every 5 years. This year was focused specifically on the collision of art and science. I directly targeted ecological art, and then within that, a subcategory of environmental justice. So I was able to look at visual analysis, artist statements, and then also meet with curators when I was able to visit to analyze the three different targets, namely the first one being spreading awareness. So one of the main exhibits that I was able to visit was at the Fowler Museum at UCLA. This exhibit focused on weaving practices of indigenous communities using cochineal, which is a specific type of insect that they're able to use into making a natural dye for these weaving practices. Not only did they have an educational sector of their installation where people could go in, kind of engage with that, and then practice it themselves. So in the picture to the left there, there is this main weaving process which started back in July of 2024 and is up, and you could engage with it and start practicing your own weaving within the museum yourself. And it was up to the end of the exhibit. And this is the main part of kind of understanding what ecological art could be defined as, in addition to evoking emotion. So it's kind of the same main point. Through a lot of the literature review that I was doing, I was finding that these kind of 3 points were really beneficial. Mainly targets 1 and targets 2 were kind of the main impacts of current literature. So one of these to point out is the art done by Nara, which is a Japanese artist that did an exhibit with 20 other artists based at the Hammer Museum also in UCLA. And this is depicting Greta Thunberg during a protest. The last kind of major impact that was the highlight of my trip was definitely the socio-environmental action aspect. One of the exhibits that I visited was able to depict smog collection at a space near the LA airport. So the picture on the left depicts a print that was done where they covered up some of the paper, collected the air pollution, and then it showed the art that you're able to see there. They also had a baby carriage that was collecting the smog levels as well, which had different placed objects from like childhood objects onto a baby carriage, which was actually made out of parts from a vehicle, which was supposed to kind of show the transportation aspect near the airport. So kind of the conclusions from this part one of the project was understanding that it is very, very common for ecological art and current literature to focus on targets 1 and 2, but for it to be focused on environmental justice specifically, targets 3 must be included in understanding how you can define ecological art. Which also brought up kind of my understanding of where I can take this project in the future and where I wanted it to go, which was when I walked into those spaces, it was largely academics, people in the art fields, and understanding that it was really limited in terms of who could access these spaces. So understanding what they were talking about in the rhetoric, but also access to these spaces itself. You have to take the lack of public transport in LA and also just be able to get to those spaces during the times that they're open. So this brought me to making my own art exhibit, an installation using my own art. Some of it had ranged from a few years back. One of the ones that I wanted to point out in the large format, there is a watercolor I used and created in Venice using the water from the Venice canals, and then a few other art that I've made in Dublin and also based in Boston here as well. And with this, I was able to create my own gallery. I know some of my friends in the crowd were able to visit this gallery as well. This was back in January. I wanted to kind of have a practice-based research approach to the things that I'd learned and written about. And specifically with this, I wanted to incorporate multiple formats of my ecological art to kind of practice what I'd learned throughout the LA exhibits. And there is a little QR code with more of the art explanations of all of the art pieces that I had in the show itself. So with this, there's just a few random pieces that were kind of scattered throughout that I was able to learn about and then put into my own art. And some of the takeaways from this specifically, creating this project was really focusing on understanding that these 3 targets, as mentioned prior, spreading awareness, evoking emotion, and kind of influencing that socio-environmental action were necessary to understand environmental justice within this art discipline. And then also this did reshape my own art practice. This was a large part of talking with my advisor and understanding how this really implements my own practice. So with this specifically, a lot of my art that I'm creating now and hopefully future post-grad will definitely have a large inclusion of understanding these eco-art techniques as well as understanding the different materials used. And then also just prior this week, on Wednesday, I presented the Campus Climate Lab understanding where these different intersections could be kind of implemented within practice across the university. So with this understanding that the standard operating procedures within the School of Visual Arts could be implemented to better understand where materials could be recycled, switching up paper usage, and then understanding where we could change the systems of practice within kind of art at the university. And with that, I want to acknowledge my advisor again, and thank her for helping out with this, as well as the Gallery 5 team and all the people at SVA that made the installation possible, and of course, Kilachand Honors College as well.
Questions? Hi, Isaac. I was just wondering, I saw on your slides that you had a photo from an art exhibit from an elementary school and also like the MoCA.
Yes.
So I just wanted to ask what differences you saw going to vast different settings and like how ecological art differed in different settings.
Yeah, so I went to a variety of different exhibits. Within the like 70 different exhibits that I could have went to, I went to 10 main ones. 9 of them were based in LA. And kind of the variety of exhibits definitely showcased who was going to these exhibits. If it's a main exhibit like MoCA, it was very accessible to the public. A lot of people went to them, they know about it. Whereas one of the main exhibits that had that like large impact on me was actually at CSU LA, which was about a 40-minute Uber outside of the city. And this was definitely one of the large ones where I was able to talk to the curator. It was just me and the entire exhibit, and no one was at the school because it was during winter break, and it was just an empty campus. And that was by far the most impactful and had direct research, and I was able to buy the book from them, take away this key thing. So I think where there was a lot of research, there was not a lot of people. Whereas a lot of the main exhibits where there was like Josh Klein's work at the MoCA, very impactful, very interesting, but was really focused on evoking emotion and did not have tangible policy work that was done afterwards. So it was more so to kind of grab attention, and this exhibit had also been shown at multiple other exhibits and other museums. So I think the takeaway was that the least accessible ones had the most impact on me.
That was really interesting, Isaac. Thank you. Can you walk us through this picture, actually? What is that? What's it made of? And
Yeah.
I mean, I can guess, but
Yeah.
tell us about that, the sculpture.
Yeah, so the sculpture on the left or the right? Which one? The tree thing? Yeah, so that is a cast of a peach tree. So at that exhibit, there was 20 different artists, all ecological-based artists. And the peach tree was from the artist, I believe it was like their hometown, that they were able to recreate a peach tree that had no longer existed because of environmental degradation. And they're able to recreate it based off kind of a model that they had, and then made a big cast of that. And then it's an oil painting and acrylic on the left, and then there's a resin mold at the MoCA that had cities that were basically sinking, and they used resin and modeling software for that. And then the Hauser and Wirth Museum at the bottom right was a big garden exhibit in between the museum. So, yeah.
Awesome presentation. Obviously, we think about things like climate change and other environmental issues being very much issues of science and issues of economics. How do you see art fitting into that picture in the future, and how do you think that like art can be used to reshape the conversation surrounding how we think about those issues?
Yeah. I think that was one of my biggest qualms that I was trying to work through. After coming back from the visit, I think there was multiple conversations with me and Short being like, how is this making an impact? Like, what am I actually doing here? And I think I'm still trying to figure that out as someone who has kind of the interest in the visual arts, but also I want to hopefully mitigate climate change if I can do so myself. And I think that I'm still working through it for sure. I think there's spaces in a lot of understanding and educating people. And once there's the educational aspect of things, making sure that activism is a large part of it. A lot of this art that I was able to look at was used for protests as well. So bringing the artistic movement into protest space, making sure that there's like access to that for politics as well, and making sure that these people, whether they're indigenous artists, whether they're artists where they're in misrepresented or underrepresented communities, making sure that they have a voice, and this gives them a platform for that.
Okay, last question.
This is beautiful, Isaac. So I know you're thinking about like philosophically what you want your art and other people's art to be. More literally, is there a way that your art practice might change after going through this, like materials or methods or styles?
Yeah, so one of the key things for me was I went to Harvard GSD just a few weeks ago, which is the Graduate School of Design focused on architecture and urban planning. And they're making like huge strides in terms of what materials they're using. So for me, it's kind of switching over to like the visual arts practice of printmaking photography into a new platform. So I'll be pursuing going to Harvard GSD this summer and switching over platforms to more urban planning and modeling, so just because I think there's more aspects for sustainable practice within those fields, whereas photography, it's a great practice. I love it a lot, and that's not going to stop. But I think switching disciplines for me within the art field is kind of how I'm implementing it into my own practice.
Awesome, thank you.